Nelofer Hidayat, and this is a very special broadcast of our show, Dear World Live, in conjunction.
That's correct. I mean, there's never a noon briefing anyway. It's usually 12:30, you know.
So 12:30 briefing, 12:15 sometimes. J'ai une question, Stéphane.
T'as une question
Une question courte.
pour moi?
Non,
Climat?
pour
Climat? Climat?
Non. C'est que climat.
Ouais, écoute, je te mets sur la liste déjà pour la semaine prochaine, si ça peut. Merci.
Pourquoi?
Pourquoi?
T'as dit la liste pour qui?
Pour la semaine, pour sa conférence.
This meeting is being recorded.
Ah bah d'accord.
Ouais.
Oui, oui.
Je te réserve une place.
J'aurai le temps de peaufiner.
De l'équiner.
Bon, ok. I don't know, ask Stéphane.
Ouais.
Non plus.
11 o'clock should be on time. Yeah.
Faut que tu me mets sur la liste.
Oui.
C'est ça pour, hein.
Renvoie-moi un mail pour me signer, mais je...
He said whenever they project, we'll be seeing WebEx here on the screen. They copy this one. It's a
Allez, voilà. Here he is.
This is his presentation. You should be able to see it on the screen in case you don't need to speak with us. Are you ready? It's in here, right? Give me a second. Steph does.
Very good morning or afternoon from no, it's still morning. Yeah, 2 minutes. You have the book.
No?
No?
It was given virtually, because there was a typo in the actual report, so.
So
But they've been given the
Virtually?
background, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Not as beautiful.
everything is virtual now.
Yeah. Okay. We have about 10 seconds. Okay. All right. Good morning. We're delighted that you could join us in this kind of brave new world of hybrid press briefings. In the room with us here in New York is the Secretary General of the United Nations, and joining us by video link we also have a Secretary General, Professor Taalas, the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. We're here for the presentation of the United in Science 2020 Climate Report. Mr. Guterres will make some opening remarks. Professor Taalas will then make some remarks and present the key findings in the report. My Secretary General will then take a few questions on climate, and Professor Taalas will remain and take other questions. We have colleagues here in the room in New York, and joining us by video link are journalists both in New York and in Geneva. And as a reminder, Secretary General Guterres will be back next week on the 16th for his annual pre-General Assembly press conference. So, Secretary General, you have the floor, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I'm pleased to join Professor Taalas of the World Meteorological Organization for this launch of United in Science 2020, a multi-agency compilation of the latest climate science. Professor Taalas will walk through some of the details, but let me say a few words from the outset. This report is a catalogue of a climate crisis that is worsening by the hour. Yes, economies slowed down because of COVID-19, but the heating of our planet has not let up. As the report shows, greenhouse gas concentrations reached new record highs in 2020. The last time levels were this high was between 2.6 and 5.3 million years ago, in the Pliocene era, when there were trees at the South Pole and sea levels were some 20 meters higher. The 5-year period since the signing of the Paris Agreement on climate change will be the hottest on human record, with average global temperatures of 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And the report also rings the alarm that there is a significant and growing chance of temporarily reaching the 1.5 degrees threshold in the coming 5 years. Over the same period, the extent of Arctic and Antarctic sea ice has been below average, and sea level rise has been accelerating due to melting land-based ice. The latest data for Greenland alone shows an average loss of ice mass of 278 billion tons a year, more than 110 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. And this is Greenland alone. 110 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of lost ice in Greenland alone. Let's not forget that there is Antarctica. Let's not forget there are glaciers all over the world. Over the next 5 years, the Arctic is predicted to continue warming at over twice the overall global rate. Our world remains off track, far off track, to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If things would remain as they are, we would go up to 3 to 5 degrees above the pre-industrial level. As this report emphasizes, short-term lockdowns are no substitute for the sustained climate action we need to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. The consequences of our failure to get to grips with the climate emergency everywhere. Record heat waves, devastating wildfires, floods and droughts. And these challenges are only going to get worse. As this report emphasizes, because of past emissions, we are locked into further heating. There is no time to delay if we are to slow the trend and limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Climate action is the only way to ensure a livable planet for these and future generations. Whether we are tackling a pandemic or the climate crisis, it is clear that we need science, solidarity, and decisive solutions. We have a choice: business as usual, leading to further calamity, or we can use the recovery from COVID-19 to provide a real opportunity to put the world on a sustainable path. That is why I have called for 6 climate-related actions to shape the recovery. First, as we spend huge amounts of money to recover from the coronavirus, we must deliver new jobs and businesses through a clean, green transition. Second, where taxpayers' money is used to rescue businesses, it needs to be tied to achieving green jobs and sustainable growth. Third, fiscal firepower must drive a shift from the grey to the green economy and make societies and people more resilient. Fourth, public funds should be used to invest in the future, not the past, and flow to sustainable sectors and projects that help the environment and the climate. And so, fossil fuel subsidies must end, polluters must pay for their pollution, and no new coal power plants should be built. It is already cheaper to build new renewable energy capacity than to continue operating 39% of the world's existing coal capacity. This share of uncompetitive coal power plants will rapidly increase to 60% in 2022. The coal business is going up in smoke. Fifth, climate risk and opportunities must be incorporated into the financial system, as well as all aspects of public policy making and infrastructure. And lastly, we need to work together as an international community. These 6 principles constitute an important guide to recovering better together. As we work to tackle both the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis, I urge leaders to to eat the facts in this report, unite behind the science, and take urgent climate action. And I call on governments to prepare new ambitious national climate plans, the national determined contributions, in advance of COVID-26. That is how we will build a safer, more sustainable future. And I now hand over to Professor Taalas to take us through the findings of the report.
Thank you very much, sir. Professor Taalas, you have the floor.
Colleague Antonio Guterres, dear representatives of media, and dear colleagues who are listening to this press conference, it's a pleasure to address you. And we have just published a new report on key findings of climate science, and it's a joint venture between several organizations, IMO, UNEP, IPCC, and UNESCO, International Oceanographic Commission. And we also have contribution from UK Met Office in the report. I would like to show the key findings as slides. Could we get the slides up, François, please?
Yeah, they should be. There
So this report contains what we know about climate, most recent evolution, including the impact of COVID lockdown on the emissions. Next slide, please. So here we can summarize the findings of this report. We have continued breaking records in greenhouse gas concentrations, especially carbon dioxide, which is the most important one of those. And there was a slowdown of emissions, especially past the spring. There was a drop in the emissions by 17% on temporary basis. But since we are returning back to normal business, this slowdown is more or less over. And these past 5 years have been the warmest on record, and we expect that this trend is likely to continue for the coming 5 years. And as Antonio Guterres just said, there's 24% probability that we will reach 1.5 degrees during the coming 5 years, at least on temporary basis. So we are not heading towards these limits of Paris Agreement 2 to 1.5 degrees. We are rather moving towards 3 to 5 degrees warming by the end of this century. Next, please. And here you can see some graphs of carbon dioxide concentrations. We have broken records in those concentrations, but also in methane and nitrous oxide concentrations. And you can see the most recent data from the US Mauna Loa Observatory, and there we are soon reaching 420 ppm of carbon dioxide, and 400 was regarded as a critical level here. Next, please. And this is what has happened because of the COVID. You can see that there has been a drop of the emissions, especially last spring. But we are soon returning back to normal levels, and this year altogether we expect that the emissions are going to be 4 to 7% lower than last year. But this is a temporary anomaly, and since the lifetime of carbon dioxide is very long, this doesn't change the big picture. So that we are still heading towards much warmer climate, and we should see these kind of drops in emissions on annual basis to be able to reach the Paris targets. So this 4 to 7% per year should happen every year, that we would be reaching the levels of Paris Agreement. Next, please. And here are temperature records since 1850s. As I said, the last 5 years have been the warmest on record, and last year, 2019, was the second warmest year on record, and so far the warmest year was 2016, which was boosted by the overall climate change and very strong El Nino event at the Pacific Ocean. And on the map you can see where this warming has taken place, during the past 5 years as compared to the previous 30 years period, and you can see that the Arctic has warmed the largest, more than double the global average. But we have also seen that the Antarctic area is warming, which is bad news because in that region we have the largest amount of glacier and even potential of 60 meters sea level rise if it would melt the whole glacier. And we have seen also an anomaly south of Greenland and Iceland, which is, to our understanding, related to the slowing down of so-called Gulf Stream, warm water from Caribbean towards Europe. And because of the warming of the ocean areas, we have tropical storms, and I will show you something about that soon. Next, please. In the Arctic, we have seen more than double the warming of global average, and we have started melting the sea ice in the Arctic, and we have already melted 75% of the sea ice mass, and there has been an acceleration of sea level rise during the last century. We typically had 1 to 2 millimeters per year sea level rise, but now we have seen sea level rise which have been exceeding 3 millimeters per year. And this is a result of melting of the glaciers, and as my colleague Antoni Guterres said, there has been especially a boost in Greenland, the glacier melting, and there has also been thermal expansion of the seawater. As we heat the seawater, it's expanding, and we have actually stored more than 90% of the excess heat to the oceans. Next, please. And here you can see what has happened in the ocean areas. These colors, reddish colors, indicate warmer than normal temperatures in the oceans, and that's enhancing both the strength of tropical storms, hurricanes and typhoons and cyclones, and it's also enhancing the evaporation. So we have more humidity in the atmosphere, which is giving a boost to the flooding problems. Next, please. And one of the matters of concern is what's going to happen to the global water resources, and we are just building a UN-wide consortium to give a boost to the Sustainable Development Goal 6 implementation on water, and we have about 10 UN agencies which have decided to join this, and we have also donor countries who have shown interest to join, and we are going to enhance the water-related observing systems and water-related services and management of water resources worldwide. And besides water, we have also a problem related to population growth, and here on the map you can see colors, especially in Africa and Southern Asia and Middle East, where the population is growing, and water scarcity is also at the same time proceeding. Next, please. And this is what we have predicted for the coming 5 years, and as I said, there's a high probability that we will see at least 1 month exceeding 1.5 degrees during the coming 5 years. That's the probability is more than 70%. And there's 24% probability that we would see 1 year exceeding this low limit of Paris Agreement, 1.5 degrees. There's very low probability that we would see the whole period exceeding 1.5. This is all demonstrating that we are fairly soon reaching this low limit of Paris Agreement, and there's urgency when it comes to mitigation efforts. Next, please. And from our sector, we can say that this COVID has also had an impact on our observing system and also in the early warning service systems. And these colors on the map indicate which areas have been affected, and you can see Africa and Latin America affected most, and there's been also a very dramatic drop in the amount of aircraft-based observations, which are also important for us. In the ocean areas, we have seen also a slight drop in the observations because of the COVID crisis. Next, please. And here you can still see the summary of this report, and the reports are available also on the website of WMO, and there are some printed copies available. And this report is supposed to summarize the recent findings in an easy readable form. I could show this report here, and I would like to thank at the same time all of the contributing partners. I think that this is also a user-friendly approach, that you can find everything in one report instead of having plenty of separate reports for various organizations. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. We'll now, the Secretary General's time for a few questions. We'll go first to the room here. Frank Ucciardo, TRT News. Go ahead, Frank. Please use your mic.
Hello. Secretary General, on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you for having this press conference. It's good to see you here and in good health. Can I do that? Is that okay with you? Okay. I just wasn't quite sure if we had permission to do that to start again. Welcome on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you doing this press conference. As long as you have been in office, you have been a champion in sounding the alarm for climate change. And I can see over the years and over the basic climate change conferences that it really must have been pretty frustrating at times, and continues to be so, because you have countries like the United States and China that have not exactly been very aggressive in cutting back their emissions. What can you do to tackle this issue in the future?
Well, first of all, it's important to notice that we have already 120 countries that have accepted carbon neutrality in 2050 and are establishing the plans to implement it. And that represents 25% of the emissions. So the big question, as you mentioned, are the big emitters. And the big emitters are the United States, China, the European Union, Japan, Russia, India. And I've been very actively engaged, both with the governments and the civil societies. I made recently conferences to a Chinese university, to an Indian university, aiming at convincing the big emitters, all of them, that it is absolutely crucial for them to commit to carbon neutrality in 2050 and to commit to a reduction of the emissions up to 2030 of 45%. Without the big emitters, all the efforts that are made will not be enough. It's important to notice that there has been a very important movement in the private sector, asset managers, banks, important multinational corporations, that there is a huge movement in the civil society, in cities, in states, also a very strong commitment of the youth. So all these reasons make me believe that the pressure over the governments of big emitters will sooner or later produce results, and that it will be possible to have a global commitment, and the national determined contributions change that will be presented up to the COP26 in Glasgow are the real opportunity to do so. I still hope that the global committers will also, the global emitters will also commit to carbon neutrality in 2050.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question will go online to Edie Leder, Associated Press. Edie?
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. Given the record wildfires in California right now, the record-breaking Atlantic hurricane season, 130-degree Fahrenheit temperature at Death Valley last month, and as you said, Arctic sea ice at a near record low, and Siberia's record heat and fires earlier this summer. What does that tell us about climate change, and what message is Earth telling us? And Professor Taalas, how much worse will it get? Thank you.
Well, the spread of wildfires, and last year it was absolutely devastating, both in the Arctic, in the Amazon basin, and several areas of the world, Africa inclusive. The spread of wildfires has a double impact. On the one hand, it is a result largely, its acceleration is a result of climate change. But on the other hand, it contributes to climate change as it releases CO2 and it destroys forests. That is an absolutely essential instrument to sink CO2. So the link between climate change and the destruction of forests is a devastating one, and we need quickly to reverse this trend and to create a virtuous circle and not a vicious circle. And this is one reason more for us to feel a very strong sense of urgency.
Thank you. Professor Taalas, if you want to answer that as well.
Yeah, so this, the fact that we have started seeing growing amount of temperature, growing amount of heat waves, and also drought events, it's often related to the heat waves that has been causing these forest fires, and we have seen record-breaking forest fires in Australia last year, recently in California, and this year, and also last year in eastern Siberia. And as Antonio Guterres said, they are also contributing to the emissions of carbon to the atmosphere. The main forest problem that we have worldwide is related to the deforestation in the rainforest areas, like in Brazil and Indonesia. That's number one problem, but these forest fires are number two problem in that sense. And then you were asking what will happen in the future. It's known that this negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades. And if we are successful with the mitigation efforts, we could phase out this negative trend in 2060s. And the sea level rise, which has been also accelerating, that will continue until next century, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Valeria Robecco, ANSA Italian News Agency. Valeria?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, good, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for this press conference on behalf of ANCA remotely. So my question is, Italy's Enel Group announced yesterday that all of its coal production plant will close by 2025. Mr. Secretary General, do you think that 5-year time frame can be a target achievable by all the major electricity producing companies?
Well, first of all, it's good to notice that coal-fired power production is indeed decreasing in several parts of the world, including, by the way, here in the United States. But that there are very strong commitments in Europe about it. Unfortunately, we still have a large number of new coal power plants foreseen in relation to the future, namely in Asia and in Africa. And one of my appeals to countries, namely those countries that export and finance coal power plants, is exactly to divert these efforts into an effort of supporting the developing world in relation to renewables, as renewables are now clearly more profitable, more efficient, and more labor creation than coal power plants. And this is the reason why I've been asking, especially the big exporters of coal power plants and financiers, namely Japan, China, and Korea, to reduce these operations. And I'm encouraged that this will be the case. And I'm encouraged that several countries that had coal power plants in their plans now, looking into the recovery, post-COVID recovery, will shift resources into renewables.
Thank you, sir. I think the Secretary General needs to...
As I was saying, and I said in my intervention, coal is going up in smoke.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary General. I know you have to go to another appointment. We will continue with Professor Taalas. Toby, NHK, please. Toby?
Hi, thanks very much, and thank you for the briefing. I just want to understand the science here. So the increased heat as a result of greenhouse gases is making the weather worse. I just want to know if that's just a plainly accurate statement. In the case of wildfires, it's because excess heat is going to sustained and increased heat waves. And in the case of storms, it's because the excess heat is going into the ocean and driving storm systems. But is it fair to say, totally safe to say that excess heat trapped by greenhouse gas emissions is just making the weather in the world worse? Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Taalas?
Yes, I think that's a right statement, and if you would use some sort of analogy with the machine, we have injected more energy to the system because we have trapped more heat to the lower atmosphere because of higher concentrations of especially carbon dioxide, but to a certain degree also methane and nitrous oxide. And that's why our machine is running with higher speed at the moment, and that means that we have more evaporation, we have more energy for the tropical storms, and we have changed the rainfall patterns. Typically at the high latitudes we have started seeing growing amount of rain, and some areas worldwide we have seen more often drought, and for example Africa and Southern Asia have been suffering because of a growing amount of drought. And since we have heated the oceans as well, that has been contributing to the sea level rise, and it's also giving more energy for the tropical storms. And this year, for example, it may be that we will break the record in the amount of hurricanes in Caribbean, and again in the Caribbean, the seawater temperatures are higher than they used to be. So your statement is correct.
Thank you. Stefano Vaccaro. Stefano?
Thank you very much. Professor, this was a question for the Secretary General, but maybe you can pass it along. Also, it's also for you, of course. It's to do with public opinion and this issue. It is a question that I repeat almost every year, because I feel that unfortunately the message in countries where it should go through, I'm talking about United States, it doesn't go through. And I want to know what the United Nations is going to try to do that, because basically public opinion, especially in a country like this, in an issue like this, like climate change, they really count. If there is not the push from there, governments are not going to change their policy. So I feel that this message, yes, for us journalists here, and not, please don't give me the answer, it's to you, I mean to us, to give them, because we are here, we will write our articles. It's just that there is something that maybe the Secretary General has to do that he didn't do yet on make the message going through. Do you agree on that?
So thanks for the good question. And when I studied meteorology in the early 80s, climate change was the secret of our community, and that was the era when WMO established IPCCs to start providing scientific information for governments and for the general public. And what has happened is that we used to have so-called climate skeptics, which was still a major challenge 10, 15 years ago. But nowadays the science has been so solid that it's difficult to question the scientific findings, and also the statistics in the countries, including USA and China, for example, is showing that majority of the population understands the challenge. And what is the new thing, that the climate change is already visible. We have started seeing growing amount of disasters, and these changes are so visible, and we have been able to show it with our measurements, and also our calculations that they made in the 80s. They have shown that the change has been as it was calculated already 40 years ago. So this science is fairly solid, but you as journalists, you have an important role to play, and the pain that the decision makers are having is that these political decisions that they make, they have to be also acceptable by the people. And once you touch the economic issues at the country level, they are always sensitive. Here in Geneva region, we, for example, saw this Yellow West movement rising in France when there was a proposal to increase the price of diesel fuel a bit. So this is demonstrating that it's not politically very easy to make these changes, but but quite often we can find also win-win solutions so that it's cheaper to heat or cool your house with climate-friendly solutions, and solar energy is very profitable, and also it may be attractive to buy electric car or biofuel using cars. So that kind of things are going to be game changers. And I'm personally optimistic that this change will happen, but how quickly it will happen, that's going to be a critical question.
Thank you. Celia de la Varenne, and then we'll go to Iftikhar. Celia?
More and more people will have to flee their country in order to survive. Sorry, how do you see the future for those populations?
That's a good question, and this is one of the matters of concern when it comes to impacts of climate change. And we have already seen, for example, the Arab Spring phenomenon in some African and Middle East countries. There was a severe drought period for a couple of years, which led to rise of food price and unemployment among the labor which were working for farms, and that was one of the reasons for unrest in Libya, Egypt, and also Syria, where the conflict is still ongoing. And we have seen problems also in Somalia and in Chad. And the risk for such problems is clearly rising, and as I said, this negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades, and we have to be prepared to face such problems. At the same time, the population growth is boosting these problems. When visiting many African countries, I've had the chance to speak with ministers and heads of state, and they are very much concerned how they can provide education and healthcare and employment opportunities for the growing population. So besides talking about climate change, we should also talk about the population growth challenge.
Thank you very much. As a reminder, if anybody has questions, just send me a note in the chat. We're going to go to the video. Iftikhar Ali, Associated Press of Pakistan. Iftikhar?
Yeah. Sir, you are predicting the next 5 years are having record heat. At this stage, do you have any proposal? You are proposing any steps for the countries to how to deal with such a record heat?
So as I said, this negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades, and as I said, I also said in my presentation that there's a risk that we would hit the lower limit of Paris Agreement, 1.5 degree, for some months. That's very likely to happen, and it's also there's a slight probability that we would see a year which would already be 1.5 degrees warmer than the average. And besides climate mitigation, we have to invest in climate adaptation, which is highly important, and that's a challenge for the governments, how to protect the people when we have a growing amount of heat waves, and how to ensure, for example, food security and water resource availability in the conditions of changing climate. So we have the two challenges. We have to at the same time mitigate the climate change, which is going to be the key to the long-term solution. But for the coming decades, we have to also pay attention to adaptation. And unfortunately, the richer countries have better capacity to adapt and better means for that, and the less developed countries are in poorer position when it comes to such opportunities. And that's something where we need also international investments to support the less developed countries in their adaptation.
Thank you. We'll go back to the room. Katerina, please.
Hello.
Yeah.
Katerina Lisunova from Ukrainian TV channel Prямei. So, Professor Taalas, I want to address another part of the issue, because while the most of the democratic and developed countries, developed world, trying to fight together the climate changing risks, other countries are using this crisis for personal benefits. For example, Russian Federation during the last decades advanced a lot in their project of drilling Arctic ice to obtain natural resources such as gas and oil. So I wonder, what is your strategy to fight against this part of the problem when other countries using global warming and situation in their personal advantage and like using business as usual approach?
This is the multifold challenge. We have those countries who are very much dependent on fossil energy exports, and actually the consumption of those resources very much takes place in developed countries, USA, North American countries, West European countries, and also in the big Asian economies. And so we have a common challenge to reduce the consumption of those resources in those countries that I mentioned. And of course, it's going to be a major challenge for those economies which are highly dependent on exports of fossil energy. And that's, of course, Russia is one of those countries, but we have also some of the Middle East countries where this is the case. And at the same time, we have to adapt to new scheme where perhaps we are not able to use all of the known fossil fuel resources if we want to be successful in climate mitigation.
Thank you very much, Professor Taalas. I don't see any more questions in the chat. If anybody has anything either in the room or on the screen, just wave. All right. Well, sorry, Maria Krenova, TASS. Please, Maria.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up Russia. I didn't quite understand. So is Russia the only European country which is acting this way? And if you are naming Russia in particular, can you name other countries? Because others in, as you mentioned, the Middle East region are not named. So let's be more fair.
I think that we shouldn't blame any individual countries here. We have a common challenge for all of the countries, and it's a challenge for those countries which are consuming this kind of resources, and it's a challenge for those countries which are producing those resources. And we have also, for example, coal production in European countries and North American countries, and it's a common challenge. And how to balance the economies, that's a major challenge for those countries which are dependent on the exports of those goods. And it's not an easy case. So that's why that's one reason why we haven't been able to solve the problem yet, although we know that it would be beneficial to do so.
Great. Okay, Professor Taalas, thank you very much. Thank you to all of us, all of you rather, joining either in the room or by phone or by video. And we'll see you soon. Professor Taalas, thank you again.
Bye-bye.